Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Natalina Nasruddin. I am the CEO and founder of Rise Up For You. And today we are going live and we are talking about workplace conflict and what are the 8 different types of conflict that we can experience in the workplace today. So I was doing a little bit of research this morning and I want to share with you some statistics. But before I share them with you, I want to remind everybody who I am and what we do. So again, my name is Natalina Nasruddin. I'm the CEO and founder of Rise Up For You. And we work with organizations and leaders around the world to enhance company culture and really elevate team performance through soft skills. That's your emotional and social intelligence, how to manage your team, communicate effectively, build career confidence, and really create a workplace dynamic that is thriving, that is pushing not only your potential as an individual, but also as an entire organization. Now, my team and I were in the trenches every single day. And so we're constantly hearing and learning about current challenges and then challenges that are coming our way due to society or economic challenges that impose themselves in the workplace. Now, one of the biggest things that we talk about with our clients is conflict. How do we deal with conflict and what are some strategies that we can implement and employ? So today we're going to talk about conflict. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'm coming live to you on both LinkedIn and Instagram, and so I'm following you here. But I want to start with some statistics because even, we're constantly doing research here at Rise Up For You, and even some of the newest statistics that just came out are shocking. So you ready for this? Okay. $359 billion is wasted every single year in the US alone due to wasted hours that are dealing with conflict. $359 billion wasted every single year due to conflict, okay? 15, healthy culture has a turnover rate of just under 14%, healthy culture. But if you have a culture, unfortunately, in the company that is toxic or not productive or is full with conflict, that's almost 50% of a turnover rate that we're seeing within corporations. So healthy cultures have about a 13% turnover rate, and those that have unhealthy cultures with a lot of conflict are seeing upward of 50% turnover rate, which, as you know, especially if you're in human resources, costs a lot of time, money, and energy. And lastly, 1 in 10 employees report that they spend at least 6 hours a week trying to manage and deal with conflict. Now, if you're a CEO or you're an executive like myself, put dollars to that. We're talking billions and billions of dollars every single year that are wasted because individuals have a hard time dealing and understanding how to manage conflict. So today I'm going to share with you what we call the 8 conflict starters. So we always try to create the impression or the narrative that it's not about the person, but it's about the problem itself and refocusing that narrative around the problem. So today we're going to dive into 8 challenges that can create conflict that help you remove it from the person itself and deal with the problem directly. Okay, let's jump in. So there's 2 psychologists, Art Bell and Bret Hart, not the wrestler Bret Hart, if anybody's a WWE fan. They studied major conflicts in the workplace. What were some of the major causes that created conflict? There's 8 of them that I want to break down with you today. The first one is power. So individuals or an individual with an organization that struggle with power with one another. So there's a need for control, there's a power play, somebody wants to assert power over another person. That is conflict starter number 1. Now, this can be from person to person, or this can be person to, the entire organization, where one person wants to assert more or maybe have control and more power, and the other will not allow. The second conflict starter, which you can probably guess, is communication. Now, there's a lot of challenges around communication that we can break down, but I'll save that for the next session. But communication, there can be challenges around languaging. There can be challenges around how you're communicating technically. So is your communication too technically difficult for the other individual to understand? Accents can be a part of the communication. Your perceptions about the people that you're communicating with can come into your communication. Lack of clarification. So communication is the second conflict starter within the workplace. And I would say probably one of the most common is that people don't comprehend or can't connect with the communication. It's not clear. And so the conflict spirals. Conflict starter number 3 is pressure. Now, we know that the World Health Organization a couple years ago has deemed burnout as an actual challenge within the workplace, right? It's part of the medical dictionary now, burnout. So we know that stress, workplace anxiety, workplace well-being has become a top priority for many organizations because there's a lot of pressure and stress that happens. So pressure can create a lot of conflict within the workplace because when we have pressure, we go into reactive mode. So if anyone's taken our emotional and social intelligence course or worked with us as clientele, you understand that one of the key components as employees and leaders we need to cultivate is emotional regulation and managing our stress. And when we don't have those tools, pressure, stress can build up, and that can create a reaction mode that can create conflict within the workplace. Number 4 is values. Also something that we love to talk about here at Rise Up For You. As you know, 76% of the workforce is disengaged. Now, although there's the study that 76% of employees turn over because of poor leaders, we also have to talk about that fact that there are a huge number of employees and team members that don't have the same values as the organization. And so therefore they're working for an organization simply because they need a job, they're looking for a paycheck, they have to put food on the table. But conflict happens because the personal values of an individual are not in alignment with the company values. Or even one step less is that the personal values of an individual don't align with the values of maybe their leader that they're under. So values is a critical component, which is why it's even more important that when you onboard a team member, you make sure that their values are in alignment with not only your company, but that they also coincide with the leader that they're going to be reporting under. Otherwise, there will be conflict and most likely turnover. As I mentioned earlier when we started, when there's poor company culture or when there's friction between leaders and employees, you can see upward of a 50% employee turnover, which costs a lot of time, money, and energy. Conflict starter number 5 is perception. So this is your perception of a situation or a person. So if you have preconceived assumptions or beliefs about a certain situation or a person, that will get in the way of how you communicate, it will get in the way of how you behave, it will get in the way of how you interact with your team. So I always say one of the best strategies you can employ, which we'll talk about here a little bit later, is going to your personal counsel before you deal with any conflict, because your personal counsel will exist outside of the conflict. They shouldn't be directly involved. They will be able to give you a different perception or a different lens to make sure that your assessment of the situation is accurate. And we're coming down to the last 3 conflict starters. Number 6 is goals. Are you going in the right direction? Now, we see sometimes conflict around co-founders, right? We've worked with a lot of organizations where there's 2 individuals that have built the company, 2 co-founders, and somewhere along the line, there was miscommunication around where they're going and what their goals are for the organization and the company. And so goals, if you're not on the right page and you don't have the same goals and the same vision, that can create conflict. We also see this within larger organizations when there's a huge company goal and then there's departments that might have different goals that aren't connected to the larger picture, right? And then conflict starts. Obviously, there's a lot of change management occurs. And now we come down to our last 2 conflict starters. Number 7 is policies, where policies can create conflict, especially if they haven't been updated. Maybe the majority of the team don't feel like the policies are adaptable to what's happening today. So policies can create conflict. And the last thing is resources. Do we have enough resources to get the job done? And do we have enough resources to make sure that we can stay neutral and grow as an organization? So those are the 8 conflict starters: power, communication, pressure, values, perception, goals, policies, and resources. So I want you to ask yourself, because you're the only one that knows, within your organization, within your team, which one do you see the most often? If you are in HR and you're constantly dealing with conflict, which one do you see the most often? Is it conflict due to communication? Is it conflict due to perception of what's happening? Is it conflict due to values? Maybe it's conflict due to resources, right? Finding the right resources to help your team. Maybe it's stress. So I want you to identify which conflict starter do you see the most often, and what's one strategy we can employ to help support the transition around conflict, right? To help support the transition and make sure that we can resolve the conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing, okay? It's only a bad thing when we leave it unresolved, and then it festers and it gets larger and larger, more people get involved, and then it becomes toxic. But if we can take the initiative to look at conflict as a challenge and solving that challenge and working together, then oftentimes when you're able to resolve conflict, you come out better on the other end for it, both your organization and you as an individual. So I want to take some questions, but I want to share just a few more things around what we can do to resolve conflict. Now, there's different methods of managing conflict. There's a man named Thomas Kilmann that created the managing conflict system, where he talks about cooperation and assertion. So think about it this way. Let's say we're on the spectrum here. We have cooperation down at the bottom, and then we have assertion going this way, okay? There's 5 different styles of how we manage conflict that can fall into that. The first one is the avoider. This is typically the individual or the persona that just does not want to deal with conflict. And so we would consider them to be low in cooperation and also low in assertion. They're right at the bottom right here. Okay, this is what we call the avoider. Now, let me preface that there is no good or bad type of style when it comes to managing conflict. It's all about using your emotional and social intelligence on when we should use it. So for example, if I am a CEO, which I am, and let's say there's conflict happening between 2 individuals on my team, and let's say that it's not anything that they can't handle, meaning that it's not an HR problem, there's no harassment involved, I might be the avoider in this situation because I want them to solve it on their own. And so I'm not going to be cooperative in solving the problem, and I'm also not going to assert when it comes to solving the problem because I want my 2 team members to solve the problem. So notice how I'm saying that every style that I'm going to share with you, there's no good or bad. It's all about using your emotional intelligence to understand when should I use this style. If we use one style too often, okay, that can hurt us. If we use the style not enough, that can hurt us. So understanding time and place around managing conflict styles. So that's the first style, is the avoider. The second style is what we call the accommodator. Okay, so the accommodator is high cooperation. Okay, so here's the cooperation line. They're high cooperation, but they're low in assertion. Okay, and that's because the accommodator is often known as the people pleaser, meaning they're going to cooperate with you. They're going to say yes. They want to make sure you're happy, but very often do they express their opinion and assert their opinion around a certain situation. So over time, if the accommodator is not careful, if they're constantly accommodating, they might get resentful and they might put themselves in a situation where they're unhappy because they don't feel heard. Okay, so that's our first 2. So we have the avoider, we have the accommodator. Right in the middle, we have the compromiser. So the person that's in the middle, the compromiser, is in the middle when it comes to cooperation, and they're in the middle when it comes to assertion. Now, this individual is careful too. They want to make sure that the relationship doesn't go south when they're dealing with conflict, okay? But they're also careful not to give too much. So they compromise on the situation. Now, this is a great solution, especially if you're dealing with conflict with somebody that's on the same level with you. So for example, being a compromiser is a great method of conflict when you're talking to another executive. Maybe you're an executive, they're an executive, you have the same level, the same power, the same buy-in within an organization. No one trumps the other. Compromising is usually the method that we're going to want to use in a situation like that. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And this is what we call the commander or the shark. So this individual is high assertion, but low cooperation. The shark or the commander is going to do whatever it takes to win. What they say goes, okay? And typically this individual is very direct, very black and white, and they truly are a shark. They're going to tell you how it is, and they're not going to change. Now, obviously the commander or the shark, we want to be mindful of how we use it. This role or this type of conflict management is really great when it comes to making a decision fast. An urgent decision has to be made. We don't have time to sit and talk about it. This is where the commander style of conflict is going to be necessary and needed. And then lastly, the final style of managing conflict is what we call the collaborator. Now, anyone that's a collaborator is usually high collaboration and high assertion, okay? So they're right at the top. Now, the owl, is what we call the collaborative owl, is great because they care about outcomes and they also care about relationships. But the challenge when it comes to the collaborator is that it takes a lot of time, because the collaborator is the person that says, nobody is leaving this room until we completely solve it and we're all happy. And as you can imagine, that takes a lot of time versus some of these other styles that I've experienced. So along with the 8 conflict starters, I also want you to ask yourself, how do I deal with conflict? How does my team deal with conflict? And what are the different styles that I'm seeing often? Does my team have a lot of commanders or sharks? Does my team have a lot of accommodating teddy bears? Does my team have a lot of avoiders? Because that's also going to tell you how conflict is resolved within your workplace. If there are a lot of avoiders and a lot of accommodators in the workplace, and then you have 1 or 2 sharks, that might not be the best well-rounded view of how we're dealing with conflict. And we want to teach our team how to use these different styles. Now, I'm going to share with you one more strategy before I let you go today and see if anybody has any questions. It's critical that when you're dealing with conflict and you're having that conversation, I'm going to share something with you that might sound really elementary, but is actually incredibly difficult for us to use in the moment. And that is reframing everything from using I versus using you. So for example, you constantly interrupt me in a meeting. Every time I raise my hand, you interrupt me, you avoid me. I feel like I'm unheard. You don't pay attention to me. Okay. When we use that language, which I will say that most individuals are still using you, even though we probably talk about this in high school using I, it's very difficult for individuals to use I in the moment when they're triggered. And so I want you to role play and I want you to practice using I statements versus you. So for example, I feel unheard in the meeting. I feel like I'm constantly being interrupted. I feel like I'm not seen. I raised my hand multiple times. I'm ignored. Notice how I've taken the you and I've implemented the I. This puts the person that's sitting across from you in the position to be an active listener and to hear you, versus when we use you statements, it can automatically put the person in a defensive state and then they will shut down and the conflict can escalate. So one small strategy to remind you today is do your best to use I statements, or if you're speaking on behalf of the organization, using we statements versus you. This is going to help de-escalate the situation and make sure that we can come to a resolution. And I also want you to reflect upon which style should I use when I'm going into a situation or I'm in a situation that feels a little tense. Do I need to be the commander at that point, the shark? Do I need to be the collaborative owl? Do I have time to be the collaborative owl? Do I need to be the fox that's compromising? Do I need to be the accommodating teddy bear that's just letting the situation go because I want the relationship to thrive? Or do I need to be the avoiding turtle that's going to say, you know what, I'm not going to get involved in this one because I want you to solve it. So when we're dealing with conflict, I want you to ask yourself, how can I reframe everything from a I point of view? And what style is going to be needed to help support and manage this conflict? So again, my name is Zetalina Nasruddin. I'm the CEO and founder of Rise Up For You. I wanted to talk about conflict. It's something that we are seeing quite often right now in the workplace, is lots of questions around how do we manage conflict? And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals that struggle with conflict. It's uncomfortable for them. The first thing I want to tell you is it's time for us to reframe our mindset around conflict, around what conflict is. It's okay to have challenges. It's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to have a little bit of tension. What's not okay is to let it go unresolved. And it's also not okay to try to resolve it when we're triggered, when we're tense, and when we haven't logically thought out how we're going to have these conversations. So please, 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 if you feel like there's conflict or tension in the workplace, deal with the situation. But I want you to role play. I want you to think about it ahead of time, and I want you to understand how are you going to potentially resolve this conflict so that it's you and the person versus the problem, not you versus the person. Again, my name is Natalina Nastradine. Thanks for joining. If you want to learn more about Rise Up For You, we do have a Rise Up For You page on all social media. You can check us out at riseupforyou.com. I would say the first step is take our emotional intelligence assessment. It's completely free. If you go to riseupforyou.com, you click on the free resources tab and you'll see emotional intelligence quiz. You can click on it, you can take that quiz, and that's just going to tell you a little bit about how you manage stress, self-awareness around yourself, and that's the first step to understanding how you lead and how you manage conflict in the workplace. Thanks again for joining.